am trying to steer the narrative. Yeah, I am trying to steer the narrative. Yeah, I am trying to steer the narrative.
Our approach to this is different than what Erin's approach is on things, which is to act emotionally, but what she has in her arsenal is a lot of prep.
So I don't know why they started this episode with Tim and Lance talking about her. I guess this is going to be some gossip rumor mill situation. How does this help find Maura Murray? Well, it actually does. The narrative steerers, they always want to suppress any kind of investigation or analysis, especially logical analysis of anything. See, the truth is not afraid of investigation. So if there are certain narrative steerers acting not genuinely, but even if they are acting genuinely and trying to help find Maura Murray, regardless of the situation, examining everything logically will move towards the truth. Because illogical faith-based assumptions and dogmatic thinking, that is the reason this case is not solved, that can be exposed and we can move forward logically, because that's the real goal, to solve the case and bring closure to the family. If that's the goal, then why not put logic at the forefront, examine all these things, and cast aside what is truly illogical, even if it's been masquerading as logical by certain narrative steers.
She does a lot of prep for everything she does, so it makes her more articulate.
She says, I was alluding to the sensationalism and presumable focus on the drama rather than finding Maura.
Smartest person in the fucking room. With her 3 and 4 syllable words. She happens to know, I just happen to know. I happen to know, guys. She's got a lot of anger.
They're assuming that's anger. It might just be cognitive dissonance, insecurity manifesting, but is that really relevant? It is if we're talking in regards to logic, the narrative, what is true, what is not true, and is it logical to dogmatically believe things on faith? Like, for example, Maura Murray was up in New Hampshire. Is that logical to believe? And let's compare and contrast other cases where you have definitive evidence. In this case, you don't. So certain people will illogically preach their religious faith-based dogma that she made it up to, and maybe she did. I'm not saying she didn't. That's the whole thing with being logical. You don't close off avenues of investigation. I'm not just going to say, the coincidence theorists think this. Yes, they do, and that coincidence might really just be a coincidence, or it might not. That's where the dogmatic coincidence theorists will not move towards the truth, because they illogically make assumptions and close off possibilities. Whereas a conspiracy theorist, aka critical thinker, they won't close off those possibilities. I'm not talking about the hardcore conspiracy theorists who are not logical, who believe that the conspiracy is true no matter what, but there are none in this case, as far as I've seen. The illogical narrative steerers, they like to paint John Smith or James Renner with the tandem driver theory. That's a theory. He never said it was 100% definitive. So again, when we're dealing with logic, these things need to be dissected and pointed out so that all of the audiences of all these different podcasts, if the goal really is to bring closure to the Murray family and find out what really happened to Maura Murray, being distracted by coincidence theorists, you try to dismiss logic, critical thinking, and deductive reasoning that conspiracy theorists bring forward, that silliness needs to be exposed.
Welcome back. I'm Erin, and I'm here with Scott and Ethan.
Hey.
Who I'm pretty sure haven't been referred to as angry and emotional lately.
Actually, there are people who refer to them as angry and emotional. Once again, Erin's starting right off with the assumptions.
No, I haven't, which honestly makes me pretty pissed off because I am angry about this case all the time.
I know!
And no one ever calls me angry. It's ridiculous.
Actually, I've repeatedly called out people getting triggered in an angry and emotional type fashion anytime their faith-based assumptions are exposed for being illogical. So again, are they pretending to know they've read every single comment about them, listened to every single podcast? Again, this is the nature of these illogical faith-based assumptions that these people deal with, and that's why people accuse them of being narrative steerers. But they might be genuine narrative steerers. They might really think, if they're that deficit in critical thinking and deductive reasoning, if they're that deficit, they really might think that what they're propagating is towards the truth. Now, does it really matter? Because if you're not solving the case, does it matter whether people were genuine or not? If you want to solve the case, then the reason for the narrative steer is basically irrelevant. We're just science is skepticism. You're not going to take hearsay on blind faith, like for whatever reason they do with Maura even being in New Hampshire. Because Butch Atwood is the only person who said that it was Maura, and once again, he said it didn't look like her. And even if he did, and even without all the shadiness about his changing accounts, even if his account was bulletproof, you're talking about a human's words. That's not science. I don't know why that's so hard to grasp for the hardcore coincidence theorists.
Well, and for that matter, John Smith or James Renner.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, they were not called articulate and well prepared either.
What is she talking about? I know for a fact Erin has participated in some of these online discussions, so she knows that Renner was called unhinged, loony, and so was John Smith. Like childlike, so right off the bat, they're already pushing false narratives and assumptions. Are they genuinely that close? Maybe they're memory deficient as well, like Maxwell Powers? I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying they're lying. They might really believe the nonsense that they're spewing. I'm not saying they don't. I don't know whether they do or they don't. Again, objectively analyzing here.
Paired either, so.
Yes. Well, it's a way to dismiss your concerns.
Actually, that's not how she's dismissed, or anybody's dismissed. People actually go point by point on what was said, but they're going to pretend none of that happened because, again, they're steering their narrative. So they're basically proving they're hardcore coincidence theorists, and they're proving that they're lying with these words, right? This is just empirically verified. Anybody with Twitter or Reddit can go and check all the comments and conversations and see that nobody's using that as a way, or if people are using that as a way to dismiss them, they're in the minority. Everything I've seen are point-by-point rebuttals, which I've done on the Mindshock podcast as well in the Maura Murray series, and I'm doing right now.
Oh, she's angry. She makes good points, but, there's also some hysterical driven points that you don't have to worry about too much.
Well, no, but I haven't seen anybody say that. They actually go by point. So, from everything that I've seen. So, I don't know if they're just concentrating on some random troll accounts instead of the bulk of the conversation going on. And then again, are they doing that intentionally? This is a compositional logical fallacy, where they pretend a minority is the majority or the absolute. Again, we're talking basic logic and reason here.
We are, what is the accusation? Changing the narrative, shifting
Correct.
the narrative.
The guy doesn't even know he doesn't even know what he's accused of. I mean, perhaps we've all overestimated all of their intelligences here. And these people are just not operating with a full deck, in which case we need to excuse them because they're just really well-meaning but severely mentally deficient. I don't know. Or, of course, they're intentionally playing stupid. I'm not going to pretend to know which because I don't know these people.
Steering the narrative.
I actually think that they are trying to say we are steering the narrative because they are trying to steer the narrative. Just say it.
Okay, so it's a no you childlike accusation. No you. Okay, so let's examine this. So the people, for example, let's take John Smith. I know he's accused them of steering the narrative. He's open to everything, so how is he steering the narrative? Again, do these people really not think anything through, or do they think the audience is just that dumb? Do they really think the people that follow the Maura Murray case are that deficient in basic logic, deductive reasoning, critical thinking, and even English comprehension, basic English comprehension here, that they're not going to understand what they're insinuating here? John Smith has never, everybody calls him out, but when has he ever lied about anything? When has he even made a mistake about something? In the history of doing the Mindshock podcast, regardless of whether he's right, he theorizes. He considers himself a conspiracy analyst, very fair point. He's analyzing conspiracy theories and various actions, and he's been told certain information. Now, just like James Renner, these are favorite targets of certain personalities in the case, John Smith and James Renner. But these two people seem to be vindicated at every turn. I mean, I don't know if Aaron Larkin and these guys are pretending there was still no grand jury investigation into Bill Rausch. I mean, I don't know. They were denying that. They were saying James Renner's just making stuff up, this, and that. James Renner has provided proof for every single claim he has made, and his claims were basically that this information was given to him. As far as I know, I've read his blog for a while, he himself doesn't purport things to be definitively true. He's saying this person told him this, and this is a theory that he has developed as a result. And he seems to be honest about everything as far as I've seen. So if he was mistaken, if somebody gave him wrong information, he still was honest about reporting the information that was given to him. Same thing with John Smith. So with these two guys, they've been vindicated at every single turn. Because I think I think someone accused John Smith of making up Witness A. People accused John Smith of a million different things, and every step of the way he's vindicated. Just like James Renner. Unlike Aaron Larkin, this Ethan Guy, and Scott Wall, who've been caught in obfuscation and lies. Now, again, that doesn't mean their motives aren't genuine, but again, very different scenarios dealing with different personalities in this case.
You're giving these people too much credit. Like, literally, people who complain about steering the narrative, they're just trying to dismiss what we're saying without actually having to argue the point.
So, again, the points have all been argued. That's why they're being accused of steering. So it's hard to believe. I'm going to have to appeal to incredulity myself and commit this fallacy. It's hard to believe that was a genuine statement by anybody older than 4 years old. Because the whole reason these personalities are accused of steering the narrative is because their points were dissected and they don't make any sense. And they're just illogical assumptions, faith-based nonsense. And not that it's not 100% true, it could be. But them pretending it is and dismissing, like Scott Wall, I think Scott Wall's still maintaining the Saturn hit a tree, completely dismissing all the evidence to the contrary and without having any actual evidence to support that claim himself. So people aren't saying, oh, he's steering the narrative, let's not examine the crashing. No, nobody's doing that. People have spent many, many hours dissecting point by point whether or not the Saturn hit a tree, and pretty much all critical thinkers have come to the conclusion, including accident reconstruction experts at the scene and the League of Private Investigators that investigated the Maura case from the outset. Now, they could be wrong, but they've all concluded that the accident scene was staged and that the Saturn did not hit a tree. And there's so many conflicting reports of even where the Saturn was. And this is even on Aaron Larkin's own podcast. So, again, are these guys really that clueless? Are Ethan and Scott really that bereft of cognitive function that they can't recognize this and they have to pretend that their illogical faith-based nonsense was dismissed because they were accused of steering the narrative? No, it's because of the illogical points put forth with nothing but cognitive dissonance and dogma that's the reason they were accused of steering the narrative. So this is almost like a circular reasoning fallacy where they're completely ignoring the actual facts of how they were labeled, how and why they were labeled narrative steerers.
Bingo.
They're just saying, like,
bingo.
You don't have to listen to them. They're steering the narrative. They have an agenda. You don't actually have to listen to the content of what they're saying because...
But everybody did listen to the content of what they were saying. This was a great podcast to pick for a logical analysis because we have the obfuscation and logical fallacies are quick fire here.
Because it's all just disinformation. Like, that's why those accusations are made.
Well, I don't know if I want to say this or not, and Scott might get mad at me, but aren't we steering the narrative?
Indeed you are. And I guess she's kind of appealing to emotion almost now, as if to try to play innocent, because would a person who's steering the narrative say something like that unless they were trying to hide the fact that they were steering the narrative? The obfuscation game is strong here.
The question is, like, what direction is it going in? It's not like whether or not you're steering it, it's toward what end. And I think that, like, yeah, I am trying to steer the narrative toward a scenario that's logical and...
Logical by dismissing all evidence that runs counter to their faith-based theories?
Fact-based and...
Fact-based. Wow. So this is where English comprehension comes into play, because if certain personalities don't know the difference between a fact and assumption, and this is the whole reason the Mindshock Maura Murray subreddit went private, because there were so many trolls obfuscating, intentionally pretending. I mean, I'm not going to say pretending. Maybe they do have severe mental deficiencies. I don't know. Clint Harding, again, perfect example. Maybe they are genuine, and they just sincerely do not understand the difference between a fact and an assumption. They have no clue about the scientific method, any logical processes of any kind. So if that's the case, that's the case. I'm not going to attack these people for it if they are genuinely trying to help the case, but they simply do not have a good grasp of the English language or logic.
Productive as opposed to fantastical and impossible.
So how logical it is to pretend to know what's possible or impossible. So I've heard Occam's razor invoked. I don't know if I've ever heard it invoked correctly. So I've mentioned this many times. People are clueless about what Occam's razor really is. When two scenarios equally explain something, when there's equal evidence supporting two different theories or explanations, the simpler one should be used. That's what Occam's razor states. That's what this remnant of medieval science states. And even if we make the assumption that Occam's razor is correct, although in nature there's many complexities that appear unnecessarily complex to the human mind, because again, everything comes back to basic psychology. I mean, do humans really think they're that perfect? I mean, Erin Larkin can't be mistaken about anything, right? So if she considers something impossible without knowing what happened to Maura Murray, unless she really does know what happened to Maura Murray, but if she doesn't, and Scott doesn't, and Ethan don't, how would they know what's fantastical and impossible? I mean, that's their own appeal to incredulity, logical fallacy. This is just basic logic they don't seem to have, unless they're intentionally steering, in which case maybe they do know and understand all of it. They just don't care because they're steering the narrative away from the truth, if that's what it is. So again, going back to Occam's razor, nothing like any examples of that, there wasn't equal evidence. So you don't just pick the simpler explanation, completely ignoring the mountain of coincidences, unless you're a hardcore coincidence theorist, like these people appear to be.
And conspiratorial. So
wait, and conspiratorial? Why wouldn't it be conspiratorial? Because criminals can only act alone? And criminals can never charm or trick or pay off anyone to ever cover for them. Like, that's just impossible. Like, let's pretend we're all new to Earth and humans. Because, I mean, we might as well get rid of all police departments because humans don't commit crimes that often. And when they do, it's always alone, right? So again, maybe it's just an English comprehension issue. People don't understand what a conspiracy is. I don't know. It's all very, very strange. But this Maura Murray case is like a cesspool for illogicality. So it's good to examine, even for the people who don't follow the true crime aspect of the Mindshock podcast and they're only into the conspiracy paranormal logic assessments. This is a good one for that as well.
To that extent, sure, I am trying to, quote, steer the narrative.
Well, I agree with your definition.
And again, if the conspiracy is what happened, then she just admitted she's trying to steer the narrative away from the truth. Because if the truth is what's something that she considers in her fallible mind, or I mean, I'm not saying every human mind is fallible. In her, but personally, whatever in her fallible mind, in Ethan's fallible mind, or in Scott's fallible mind, whatever they consider impossible, fantastical, or conspiratorial can't be true, and they're trying to steer the narrative away from that. So if it's the truth, they just admitted that they're steering the narrative away from the truth.
I think that the way that it gets spun online, though, has a negative connotation. So when people say you're steering the narrative, I feel like what they're trying to say is you're just trying to manipulate my thinking.
Well, that is kind of what it is, but to clarify myself, Bruce McGuire, I'm not pretending to know whether they're genuine or not. So any kind of connotation wouldn't necessarily be negative because maybe they are really good people trying to help solve the Maura Murray case. They're just clueless, so this steering the narrative is dangerous either way because it's going away from the truth regardless.
So I disagree that that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I would agree with you, Aaron, by the way. I mean, to a certain extent, we are steering the narrative.
Well, here's the thing. If they are steering the narrative and they disagree or agree, I mean, how much is that worth? How much is that statement worth? Because would a narrative steerer admit to being a narrative steerer unless they're obfuscating so hardcore that they pretend to admit it or they're trying to appeal to emotion and appear more innocent than they are? I don't know. Again, that's the thing with coincidence theorists. Coincidence theorists dismiss it as coincidence, whereas a conspiracy theorist, aka critical thinker, would say these are all valid possibilities if you don't know the truth. I mean, is being a conspiracy theorist really just being scientific and admitting that you're not going to trust and put faith in the hearsay of humans and that you really don't know for sure? I don't know why that's so difficult. I mean, what kind of an ego would someone have to not be able to admit that they don't know for sure? But that's kind of the MO of coincidence theorists. They just put their blind faith in authority worship. And they believe certain humans that they perceive as experts to be infallible.
I think the people who levy that accusation, though, are implying that you're steering the narrative for your own benefit, when the reality is it's more like you're trying to refocus attention in a direction that you think is actually going to be productive.
Well, both those scenarios are floated. Again, black and white fallacies, guys. These are basics.
So it all depends on, what is your motive?
Right. I mean, I'm just trying to make a paycheck.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about?
So, conspiracies and law enforcement.
Nice.
There's a lot of talk about conspiracies in this case.
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't there be? Criminals always act alone. Again, how silly is it for people to just put their blind faith in this dogma, in this religious dogma that criminals can only act alone, and if they're wearing some kind of government costume, that means they couldn't have been complicit in any way. It's really, really bizarre.